Hi everyone, Jordan Spangenburg here from Module 8. And this data that we're seeing for this module for me is test scores that I collected from Chapter 1 in both of my math classes. You can see I have them split up into Group A and Group B just based on the two math classes. And the test that the students took here was on place value. So this is always the first test that we give every single school year in math class. And just a couple of things to note here as we go through this. So first of all, when students come to me in 5th grade, this is the first time that they get letter grades, first time that they're really seeing percents. They don't receive those kind of grades in elementary school. So we always have to go through with our students just kind of explain, how the percent directly relates to the letter grade that they're receiving. The second thing then is we teach our students and guide them and help them and direct them to try to get to a proficient score. So proficient score is anything over 70. So that's why you'll notice in this data, as I analyzed it, I did highlight those students that did score below a 70. And you'll see in my Group A set, there were several students that scored below 70, nobody in the Group B set. Also in the Group B set, you'll notice that 3 students were excused from this assessment, and that's because they receive 60 minutes of pull-out support, and then they just come to me for the last 30 minutes of math class. So they don't receive grades from me, nor do they take the same summative assessment that my other students will be taking. So as I analyze this data, the first thing that I like to do for my students is giving them feedback. So the questions that they got incorrect, we do have rubrics already loaded on Schoology, which is our learning platform. And in that rubric, we can score them based on the criteria for the rubric, so they can see that and understand why they didn't receive any points or may have gotten half credit. The other thing that we're able to do in Schoology, which is really cool, is give them feedback. So we can give them immediate feedback on each of the questions as well, similar to what our professors at Millersville can do with D2L. So the students can go in for each question, they can read the feedback, or I can just give them feedback, overall on the assessment as a whole, so they can again get that immediate feedback. Also, before the students take this first test, and for every test moving forward, we do use a study guide, and we teach them that, in 5th grade, they do have to study for math. So this is a new concept for a lot of students in elementary school. They probably did not have to study or do a whole lot of studying outside of school for a math test specifically, but in 5th grade, we do teach them that they did have to study. They do need to study. So I have them do a quick self-assessment, and I just ask them 2 basic questions that they just write on the top of the study guide before they turn it in before the test. And the first question is, did you study? Yes or no? And the second question then is, if you did study, how long did you spend studying and reviewing that study guide? So I always have them answer that before we do each test. And again, that just gives them a quick, self-assessment. Did they prepare for this test or didn't they? And generally the scores do reflect that. So anyway, as I'm interpreting the data here, so like I said, we aim to get all of our students at the proficient level, so that's going to be the 70% or higher. So the ones that did not score at the proficient level, they do have the opportunity to do some remediation and then also take a retest. So the ones especially that scored below proficient, they were given that opportunity. And some of the students did take advantage of that, others did not. And then their scores are reflected. So the data that we're looking at here, this is just their first time through. So this does not include any remediation or retesting. So if we look over here then at the mean set here and the standard deviation. So for Group A, the mean was just over that proficient mark, so 7 out of 10. Group B was a little bit higher. The mean was just a little bit over an 8 out of 10, and with a pretty low standard deviation. I took that data then and turn it into 2 graphs just based on both of my classes. And again, I'm looking for those scores below a 7. So you can see there with the chart for Group A, specifically then picking out those 6s and those 5s as well. And then Group B, we see the same data, and every student did score a 7 or higher in my second math class. So specifically then, when I go back to this data, I can look at the specific students that didn't score at a proficient level and see what remediation and then retesting opportunities they can do to get them to proficient or higher. Again, with this test then, as we interpret the data and just look at it, every year we tell our classes the same thing, in that the place value, the concept of place value, is very challenging. It's very difficult. It's a lot of, it's not a lot of computation. It's more of, analyzing and interpreting and math questions like that. So those questions tend to be a challenge. And generally, I do see scores lower on this test than I will see throughout the rest of the school year. So I always have that in the back of my mind. And that's one thing that I really tell parents at the beginning of the year as well. When these first tests come back, if your student does not score what they would typically score on a general math test from elementary school, it's not time to panic. It's not time to consider, switching math classes or looking at things like that. I just tell them that this test is challenging, and I tell the students that as well. So this first one, it's kind of a good opportunity for students to learn, opportunity for them to, again, self-assess after the test and see what can I do better to prepare myself for the next math test. And then moving forward, the tests generally are not as hard as this one, because as we move into the different units after place value, we do get into more computation things, so things that they're able to compute and working with numbers and different things like that. And generally, kids do a little bit better with those than they would for Chapter 1, which is not a lot of computation, like I said. So that's one thing that I always keep in mind. The second thing then, as I'm just reviewing, how I'm teaching and what I'm teaching, I try to do some different things. So the past couple of years, I've really implemented some station rotation models in this, and just really, hammering home some of these place value concepts that tend to be more challenging than others. So really helping students understand. So, one of the big things we focus on is writing numbers in different ways, so making sure they can do that. We compare numbers across the place value system. So for those of you that teach math, you're familiar with the 10 times as great and 1/10 as great. So that's always a challenge for students. And then using the study guide, we format our study guides to be very similar to what the tests look like. So again, we teach our students that they do need to study. So using the study guide should be helpful to them. And hopefully after the first test, then, like I said, moving forward, they understand the value of the study guide and the role that it plays in a math class. Especially if this is new to them, something they have not had to do before in math. So, I use all of this data as I analyze it and interpret it, and, just look at how I'm teaching to kind of help guide my instruction each year. And again, just with the understanding that place value scores for Chapter 1 generally are lower than they would be throughout the rest of the school year. All right, so again, Module 8, my data analysis and interpretation. And again, this was Chapter 1 place value with both of my math classes.